You ever notice how the quiet ones move? Soft voice, gentle smile, eyes that look harmless, almost childlike. The kind of presence that makes a man relax his guard without realizing he's doing it. She carries herself like someone who would never hurt anyone, like she's too pure for conflict, too sweet for deception, too delicate for strategy. And that's exactly why the mask works. Because the most effective manipulation doesn't look like manipulation, it looks like innocence. Let's get one thing clear before we go deeper. This isn't about all women, and it isn't about paranoia. Plenty of women are genuinely kind, stable, and sincere. Plenty of men can be just as deceptive and performative. What we're talking about is a specific type of person, an archetype, who learns how to weaponize softness, ambiguity, and vulnerability to stay in control while appearing blameless. And if you're a man who leads with loyalty, protection, patience, and benefit of the doubt, this archetype targets your strengths. Because your strengths are predictable, you protect what looks fragile. You give more when someone looks misunderstood. You soften when tears show up. You rationalize inconsistencies when the person seems sweet. That's not weakness. That's how you're wired. But the moment you confuse sweetness with safety, you become easy to steer. The person who plays innocent doesn't walk into your life with boldness. They drift in quietly, deliberately understated, almost like they want to make sure you never see them coming. At first, it feels rare. The shy smile, the gentle voice, the way they listen, like every word you say matters, the way they seem different from the loud, chaotic types you've dealt with before. And because you want peace, you start assuming peace is what they are. But here's the first rule a grown man learns the hard way. Appearance is not character. Vibe is not values. Softness is not integrity. A person doesn't need to be aggressive to be dangerous. They only need you to believe they aren't capable of danger. And innocence is the most efficient illusion ever engineered. Watch how this type behaves around new people, especially around men they want to influence. They play small. They let others speak for them. They act like things just happen to them instead of being choices they make. They'll say they hate drama, hate toxicity, hate games. That sounds good until you realize something. Truly stable people don't need to announce how stable they are. Truly loyal people don't need to keep repeating how loyal they are. Truly innocent people rarely build their identity around being innocent. When someone repeatedly sells you a brand, it's worth asking why. Because often, that brand is there to disarm you. It's there so you stop asking the questions that would expose patterns. This is how psychological camouflage works. When a person wants power without responsibility, they hide behind harmlessness. They let you fill in the blanks. They let your imagination do the heavy lifting. You assume purity because you never see the parts of them that would contradict it. An assumption is the currency they trade in. The less they show, the more you project. And projection is how good men walk willingly into traps. I had a client once, solid guy, disciplined, successful, not naive. He met a woman he described as too sweet to lie. She giggled at everything, acted shy when he complimented her, claimed she was old fashioned, said she didn't even like attention. He trusted the vibe. Later, he found out she was juggling multiple men, not in a messy, obvious way, but in a quiet, organized way. Separate conversations, separate stories, separate emotional lanes. And he wasn't even the main one. What fooled him wasn't one big lie. It was the belief that softness equals safety. That's the emotional shift that hits men like a brick. Softness can be authentic, but in the wrong hands, it becomes psychological theater. So here's the masculine reframe: never judge someone by how harmless they appear. Judge them by the patterns they hope you're too distracted to notice. And the patterns don't show up as dramatic confessions, they show up as missing information. This type rarely lies outright. Outright lies are risky. Outright lies can be proven. Instead, they give you 70% truth and let your imagination invent the remaining 30. And that missing 30 is where the danger lives. This is how people hide past behavior, intentions, habits, and overlapping options, not by deception, but by omission. They'll tell you they dated casually, but won't define what casual means. They'll say they had a long relationship, but won't explain the gap between that and now. They'll say they value loyalty, but never mention whether they've ever broken it. They'll tell you they hate drama, but their entire history is a trail of chaos they call misunderstandings. They give you fragments and watch which version of them you build. Most men don't realize this. Men aren't usually manipulated by the lies they hear. They're manipulated by the truths they never receive. A man once told me, "She never lied to me." I asked him to list what she actually told him. The list was short. The blanks were long, and in those blanks lived the reality that destroyed him. Because a fully known person has less leverage. A partially known person can be anything you want them to be. And fantasies are easier to control than reality. Watch how they answer questions. Ask where they were last night, and they start with emotions instead of facts. It was stressful. I was overwhelmed. I needed space. Ask about an ex, and you get circumstances instead of accountability. It just didn't work. Bad timing. Wrong energy. We grew apart. Ask about patterns, and you get generalities instead of specifics. I'm a private person. I don't like labels. I don't like talking about the past. They don't delete the truth. They dilute it. And the more they dilute, the harder it is to hold them to anything. That's when you start doubting your own instincts. You feel something is off, but nothing is provable. You're not dealing with a clean betrayal. You're dealing with fog. And fog is how a man gets trapped. Because in fog, you don't make firm decisions. You hesitate. You overthink. You seek reassurance. You chase clarity from someone who benefits from keeping you unclear. Now, if innocence is the mask, vulnerability is the stage. This type knows exactly when to break down, when to tremble, when to let their voice crack just enough to make you believe they're fragile. But listen carefully. Fragility, when weaponized, is not weakness. It is influence. A crying person can redirect an entire conversation. A shaking voice can erase accountability. Tears can turn a man from investigator into protector in seconds. That's the mechanism. Men are wired to respond to distress. A woman doesn't need force to control a man. She only needs to activate the instinct he can't turn off. So when she senses you pulling away, she becomes soft. When she senses you noticing inconsistencies, she becomes emotional. When she fears being exposed, she becomes wounded. And none of it is random. Watch closely. She doesn't cry when she hurts you. She cries when you confront her. She doesn't break down when she's guilty. She breaks down when she's questioned. She doesn't get emotional when she's wrong. She gets emotional when you're about to realize she's wrong. A man once told me, every time I tried to have a serious talk, she'd tear up and say I was being harsh. He thought he was hurting her. In reality, she was resetting the power dynamic. His logic meant nothing Once her tears entered the room, he stopped pushing. She avoided accountability. The cycle continued. That's why vulnerability becomes an escape hatch, a reset button, a way to turn the spotlight away from behavior and onto your reaction. And the emotional shift is brutal. You realize you've been comforting someone who was controlling you. So here's the masculine reframe. A strong man doesn't collapse because someone cries. He stays present, but he stays on the subject. He listens to the words, not the performance around them. Because if accountability disappears the moment tears show up, those tears aren't intimacy, they're leverage. Now let's talk about one of the most addictive tactics in human behavior: intermittent reinforcement. This is where the innocent mask becomes truly dangerous because the person doesn't reject you outright. They become harder to reach. Replies slow down. Tone shifts. Enthusiasm fades by degrees so small you question your own perception. It isn't a clean exit, it's conditioning. They teach you to tolerate uncertainty, to accept inconsistency, to chase stability that they control. The person who used to respond quickly now takes hours. The person who leaned into you now pulls away. And the most dangerous part is they never explain why. Silence becomes the method. Your anxiety becomes their leverage. This is intermittent reinforcement. Reward comes unpredictably, so your attachment deepens. Casinos use it. Manipulators use it. And yes, some sweet people use it too. Because every delayed message makes the next quick message feel like affection. Every withdrawal makes the next moment of warmth feel like love. And inconsistency keeps you invested. A clean exit gives clarity. A slow fade gives confusion. And confusion is how you stay hooked. I've heard men describe it perfectly without knowing the term. She'd disappear for days, then come back with a soft apology and an excuse that sounded believable. Work stress, family issues, mental exhaustion, just enough truth to be convincing, never enough transparency to be real. He wasn't dating her. He was managing her absence. That's the shift that wakes you up. You're not in a relationship. You're in a pattern. And here's the reframe. Judge a person not by how they act when present, but by the pattern they create when absent. Because character shows up in consistency. Now let's talk about the quiet network. The "I'm not like that" speech is common with this archetype. I don't entertain attention. I don't flirt. I don't keep options. I'm not like other girls. Words. But watch behavior. Notice who's in the background. Notice the just friends who clearly want her. Notice the ex who still has access. Notice the DMs she doesn't shut down. Notice the attention she claims to hate but never actually removes. This doesn't mean a woman can't have male friends. Adults can have friends of any gender. The issue is not friendship. The issue is emotional insurance. Some people keep orbiters the same way. Insecure people keep locks, not because they're being robbed, but because the idea of not being protected scares them. So they keep a backup audience. Old flames. Nothing serious. Men who mean nothing. Men who only message sometimes. Men who appear the moment she feels you pulling away. Not coincidences. Safety nets. And here's how you spot it. The energy change when competition appears. When another woman notices you, the soft girl becomes alert. The innocent girl becomes strategic. Suddenly she's affectionate. Suddenly she's attentive. Suddenly she's invested. Not because love activated, because threat activated. Then when the threat disappears, she returns to distance. So the man confuses possession for love. But possession isn't love. Possession is fear. And fear makes people behave intensely without actually valuing you deeply. So here's the reframe. Never mistake possessiveness for devotion. Some people fight hardest for what they don't respect enough to treat well. Now, we get to one of the most precise tools in the entire playbook, ambiguity. This type rarely says exactly what they want. They speak in suggestions, not commitments, hints, not truths, implications, not decisions. This is how they maintain control without appearing controlling. Ambiguity is plausible deniability engineered with precision. Because the person who defines nothing often controls everything. When they refuse to be specific, you become the one who bends. You guess. You adjust. You chase clarity. And the more you chase, the more they learn your psychology, what drives you, what scares you, what keeps you hooked. A man once told me, I never knew if we were dating or just talking. He knew her childhood stories, her fears, her dreams. Yet she never called him her boyfriend. He was close enough to warm her ego, far enough to avoid responsibility. When he finally asked for clarity, she said, I don't like labels. They complicate things. Translation: labels limit options. Ambiguity gives 3 advantages. They get relationship benefits without relationship responsibility. They can entertain other people and still claim innocence. If it collapses, they blame you for assuming. Nothing they did was technically wrong, but nothing was right either. And the emotional shift comes when you realize the confusion wasn't accidental. It was strategic. So here's the reframe. A man who demands clarity becomes untouchable. Ambiguity only works on men who fear the truth. Now, here's the most psychologically violent move in the entire pattern. The frame flip. You confront something questionable, something disrespectful, something inconsistent, and suddenly you're the problem. Not because your facts are wrong, but because your interpretation is hurtful. They don't defend actions. They attack your right to question them. If you point out a lie, they talk about your tone. If you mention inconsistency, they call you controlling. If you call out disrespect, they say you're insecure. They never argue facts. They argue your permission to notice facts. That's a sleight of hand. Guilt gets transferred from their behavior to your boundaries. A man told me his girlfriend flirted openly with another guy in front of him. When he brought it up, she didn't apologize. She didn't even acknowledge it. She looked wounded and said, I can't believe you think so little of me. And just like that, he was comforting the person who disrespected him. That's the cycle. Their behavior wounds you. Your confrontation wounds them. And you end up apologizing. Why does it work? Because harmlessness creates emotional gravity. The more sweet they appear, the more you hesitate to hold the line. So the reframe is razor sharp. When someone dodges accountability by making you feel guilty for noticing, that's not innocence. That's control. Now let's talk about the victim narrative, the story they rehearse long before you arrive. They'll tell you they've been misunderstood their whole life, misjudged, betrayed, taken advantage of, hurt by people who didn't appreciate their heart. At first, it sounds like vulnerability, but listen closely. It also functions as future insurance. If you call them out, you become just like the others. If you question them, it becomes, this is why I don't open up. Victimhood becomes immunity. Now you feel like you can't hold standards without hurting them. And if you can't hold standards, you can't lead your own life. A man tried to be the one who finally understands her. Every time he raised a concern, she shut down and said, I knew you'd hurt me too. And he spent months apologizing for things he never did. This is the most dangerous form of manipulation. Power hidden inside weakness. Control hidden inside fragility. Intention hidden inside emotion. So here's the reframe. Never lose yourself trying to understand someone who uses misunderstanding as a shield. Because real vulnerability invites truth. Weaponized vulnerability avoids it. And then comes the moment they never prepare for. The moment you see clearly. Not the softness, not the shyness, not the curated fragility. You see timing. You see patterns. You see how tears show up when accountability appears. You see how distance appears when responsibility is required. You see how affection appears when competition shows up. You see how confusion appears when commitment is requested. The mask doesn't fall all at once. It cracks. They forget to respond like the harmless person they've been portraying. They slip into irritation instead of gentleness. They become defensive instead of reflective. They show anger instead of confusion. And in that one unguarded moment, your intuition wakes up. Here's the psychological truth. People reveal themselves when they lose control of the narrative. And nothing destabilizes the innocent mask more than a man who stops reacting to it. Because the mask depends on your participation, a persona can survive as long as you keep reading the script. When you stop reading it, the performance ends. A man once told me the turning point was simple. He stopped apologizing. She tried the usual tactics: tears, silence, withdrawal, soft guilt. He didn't rage. He didn't beg. He didn't chase. He stayed calm and stayed on the subject. And she panicked, not because he was cruel, because he finally understood. When a person realizes the mask no longer blinds you, they do one of two things. They correct behavior, or they escalate manipulation. Either way, you win, because you're no longer being led by illusion. That's the shift. Not anger, not bitterness, clarity. And clarity is sovereignty. So let's bring it home. This was never about innocence. It was about perception, about how easily a good man can be steered when he mistakes softness for safety, vulnerability for honesty, and confusion for complexity. You weren't broken. You weren't stupid. You were simply seeing someone through a lens they handed you. A lens polished with half-truths, selective softness, and perfectly timed fragility. But once you see the mechanics beneath the mask, you can't unsee them. You start watching pauses, not promises. Patterns, not excuses. Consistency, not chemistry. Behavior, not branding. And something changes inside you quietly, permanently. You stop reacting. You stop chasing. You stop assuming purity where accountability is missing. You become the kind of man who can't be led by charm, distracted by innocence, or controlled by emotion. And the people who rely on masks feel that shift instantly, because innocence only controls the man who still believes in it. So if you're listening to this and something in you is clicking, here's your standard going forward. Respect is measurable. Accountability is visible. Consistency is undeniable. A sweet person who respects you won't keep you in fog. A soft person who loves you won't punish you with silence. A kind person with integrity won't flip your boundaries into guilt. And the moment you stop rewarding performances, the right people stay and the wrong people reveal themselves. Not because you became cold, because you became clear. And clear men are hard to manipulate. That's the point. Not to hate, not to fear, not to obsess, to see, to hold standards, to protect your peace, to choose people whose softness is real, whose vulnerability is honest, and whose innocence doesn't require your ignorance to exist.